and thank you very much for joining. Good evening, and welcome to our weekly salon, where we gather every Wednesday to discuss careers and research topics. And today's session is particularly intriguing as we're going to explore that perennial debate of amongst academics, particularly, which is industry versus academia and how to decide. Choosing between a career in industry and academia is a complex decision that hinges on personal goals, lifestyle needs, and work preferences. And academia offers intellectual freedom, control over your research, and the opportunity to teach. However, it also comes with challenges such as securing funding, publishing pressures, and often, as I'm all sure we're all too aware, short-term contracts. On the other hand, industry is dynamic, focusing on practical applications, offering often higher salaries, better benefits, but it may require a faster pace and have less autonomy. So how do you decide between the two? It's a moral dilemma as well, is it? And which path is best for you? And once you've made your choice, what comes next? Can you move between the two? To help us navigate these questions, we have two brilliant guests. Welcome to Dr. Marianne Chapleau and Dr. Ashleigh Vella. Hi. I didn't check before, Ashleigh, because we were so rushed before. Is it Vella or Villa?
It's Vella.
Vella. Well, thank you very much, Ashleigh. Marianne is a neuropsychologist and medical science liaison coming to us from San Francisco. We're truly global today because Marianne is coming from San Francisco. I'm in the UK, and Ashleigh is you're in Sydney. Yeah? Sydney, good. Marianne brings over 10 years of clinical and research experience from the University of California and McGill University in Canada. Marianne is passionate about patient care and improving diagnosis of neurodegenerative diseases. Does that sum up rightly, Marianne? And you've made the transition from academia into industry now.
Yes, I did.
Dr. Ashleigh Vella is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging at University of New South Wales in Sydney. Ashleigh's research focus is on modifiable risk factors for dementia, using machine learning techniques and large longitudinal data sets to investigate genetic and environmental influences on aging and dementia. There's a lot of big words in that. Hello, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We should say it's 5 a.m. in Sydney, and I didn't look at what time it is in San Francisco, where you are in San Francisco. Is it like noon, something like that?
It is. Yes.
And it's 8 p.m. in the UK. So wherever you're joining from, I hope this is a suitable time of day, or if you're watching on catch up, thank you very much for taking time to join us. If you're new to these sessions, let me just recap on the format. Essentially, what we do is we have a 30-minute live stream, although to be honest, they've all been getting a little bit longer than that, where Marianne and Ashleigh will each present their insights for 10 minutes. And I haven't given them any preparation other than the topic, so I'm just as interested as you are to hear how they've interpreted this subject and what we're going to hear. It could be top tips, or it could be reasons why you should never go into academia. I never thought we could have actually made this a debate, couldn't we, with Ashleigh arguing for academia and industry being evil, and Marianne arguing that industry is the way and academia that's for another live stream, another time. After the live stream, we'll continue the conversation in the chat, where you will have a chance to interact with both of our guests, to ask your own questions, to put your own perspectives and points of view across, and to share your own thoughts. But that's enough from me, I think. And Marianne is going to present first. So Marianne, would you like to share your screen, and we'll turn our cameras and mics off and hand over to you?
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Adam, for the invitation. And I really look forward to sharing my thoughts on the subject. So I will just quickly share my screen. And then...
That's perfect. We can see that.
Okay, great. Again, thank you so much.
You might just want to hide the banner.
Oh, yes. Okay, great. So again, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Marianne. I am a medical science liaison, but I'm a clinical neuropsychologist by training. Prior to joining Life Molecular Imaging as a medical science liaison, I was a postdoctoral fellow at UCSF for 3 years. And prior to that, I was a postdoctoral fellow at McGill University back in Canada. And so I'm going to start by saying something a little bit spicy. I will try as best as I can to give you tips to try and make a decision whether you're thinking of staying in academia or moving to industry. But what I hope I convince you of is that I think that at the end of the day, I don't think that the question should be whether you should choose academia versus industry, because they are not that different. I think that we love to point out, on Twitter, on social media, how different they are, but I think they're way more similar than one would think. And I think that at the end of the day, the question should be, what kind of impact do you want to have in this world, in your field of interest, and where can you find a position that can allow you to achieve your goals? So that's something that I think is important to think about, and not necessarily just academia versus industry. But on that note, just a few thoughts. I think one thing that is, may seem very basic is to think about what makes you truly happy on a day-to-day basis. That's not something that I spent enough time doing before applying for jobs. And I think that's really important to just think about that and maybe writing these things down. So for example, do you prefer figuring out something complex by yourself, brainstorming with others, being critical of other people's work, teaching, writing parts of a grant? So really writing those things down, I think, can be helpful to target a role that will allow you to do these things on a daily basis. I think another thing to keep into consideration is, what are your main skills? I feel like in academia, we often get taught that we need to be good at everything, but I don't think that that's necessarily realistic. And so, if you're thinking about moving to industry and you really like doing science, so doing the bench work, I think a clinical scientist or data scientist position might be worthwhile exploring. If you like writing papers, there's, medical writers position that really target that role. If you like communicating, brainstorming, and educating, maybe a medical science liaison would be the good fit for you, or even a consultant position. And there are many, many other options out there. So, I think first step, just writing down what are your interests, what are your skills, and then targeting a position that really is aligned with those values, with those skills, might be more beneficial than just targeting any position that could be that a postdoc could end up doing. Another thing to consider is, what are the compromises that you are willing to make? So for instance, if you want to move out of academia, letting go of some intellectual freedom might be part of the process. I'm not saying that all jobs in industry do not allow you to have intellectual freedom, but as a general concept, I think that you probably have more intellectual freedom in academia. Are you willing to work on the weekends, and etc.? So I think, again, just writing these things down might be helpful. On the other hand, I think, thinking of the compromises that you're not willing to make are also very important. And that you might figure out while you are interviewing with certain companies, certain, industries. For instance, while I was interviewing, I realized that I really wanted to stay in the field. That was very important for me. I interviewed for positions that were outside of my field of interest, and I just didn't feel that passion, didn't feel motivated to pursue those kinds of roles. So I think, going out there and seeing for yourself what are the positions that you like, what are those that you don't like as much, could be a good exercise to think of those compromises that you are willing versus not willing to make. So that can be your values as a scientist, etc. Another important component is, what are your main personality traits? Are you more introverted? Do you prefer to work in front of your computer? Do you love talking to people all day? Do you pay attention to detail? Are you adventurous? Do you like to travel a lot, meet new people? So all of these things can kind of guide the kind of role that would be a good fit for you. And obviously, what is your life, your general life situation and lifestyle expectations? So for instance, if you want to stay in academia, are you willing to move to a different state, a different province, country, etc.? So, or, do you have a clear path for you? All of these questions, depending on your life situation and lifestyle expectations in terms of salary and so on, I think can help you make a more informed decision. So now I just wanted to say a few words about my role as a MSL, because some people might not be familiar with the role. So I work for a company called Life Molecular Imaging, which is a medical imaging company that develops novel PET imaging tracers in the field of neurodegenerative diseases. And my role within the company is really to provide support and education to what we call key opinion leaders. So these can include academic researchers or clinicians. In my case, they're most often neurologists that are really experts in the field. And we also provide support and education to patients and caregivers through community outreach, for me in California, because that is the territory I'm covering. So working, for instance, with the Alzheimer's Association, other nonprofit organizations, discussing with legislators, politicians, all of that can be part of educating and supporting family and caregivers. So my day-to-day includes providing supports to these KOLs, but also onboarding new teams that are part of multi-site studies that involve our PET imaging tracers. So I don't just interact with people that are based in California. My day-to-day also includes preparing presentations, staying up to date with new findings in the field, discussing the strategy of medical affairs with my team, planning business trips, attending conferences, traveling to meet KOLs, training of new MSLs. So you can see that there's some tasks or some things that I do on a day-to-day that kind of resemble what one would do in academia. Some things are a little bit different, but so that's kind of what I meant by depending on the role, it's not that different. There are some things, attending conferences. I go to AIC, I go to AN, which are conferences that I used to go to in academia as well. So there are, in my situation, there are a lot of similarities between what I used to do as a postdoctoral fellow and what I do now as a medical science liaison. And last thing I wanted to briefly discuss is what I enjoy the most about the role. And so for me, again, this is just my personal experience, but I have a lot of independence and flexibility in my role, which might be a little surprising. We often hear that people in industry don't have a lot of independence, but for me, if I'm being honest, I've never had as much independence as I do now. As a postdoctoral fellow, I know there's a lot of variability in terms of how much independence people have during their fellowship, but for me, I never had the opportunity to choose the projects that I would lead, or didn't have a lot of independence in terms of the science. Whereas now I feel like I do have a lot of independence regarding what I do on a day-to-day basis. And another thing I really enjoy about the role is the opportunity to travel and meet new scientists, clinicians, and having the opportunity to still get to talk about my favorite topics every day. So I've been working in the field for a long time. And again, I mentioned a couple of times that for me, the most important thing was to be able to, still have a significant impact in terms of patient care, in terms of the science, and helping the field move forward. And I definitely feel like I can still do that as an MSL working for Life Molecular Imaging. And so one thing that I would just finish saying as a conclusion is just make sure that you find something that is aligned with your values, because at the end of the day, even if you make more money, even if you have better benefits or things like that, at the end of the day, if you don't like what you do, you're not going to be happy. So I think really finding something that makes you truly happy and is aligned with your values, either as a scientist, as a person, I think will be beneficial in the end. So that's all I had for you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was really, really great. And I love this kind of idea that this isn't a decision of one or the other. It is to suit what your lifestyle and your goals. How does the culture differ between, in your experience, from academia to industry?
That's a great question. In my experience, I feel like the culture in industry is a little bit more, there are more boundaries around it, which in my opinion is not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. For instance, in terms of how people behave with one another, I know that in some academic institutions, there's a lot of behaviors that are monitored, and the relationships, the hierarchy is highly monitored. But I feel like in my experience, I've been in some academic institutions where I feel like there were less boundaries, which can sometimes feel a little bit more corporate in industry. But at the same time, if we think about safety, if you think about behaving in a professional manner, I just feel like there's a little bit more boundaries. But then, the downside of that, I think, is that it can feel a little bit more superficial or corporate, versus in academia, there's not that kind of vibe necessarily.
And I suppose it's not that different to working in academia in so much as, different institutions are different to work at. I mean, you've worked, your experience, you've been at McGill and you've been elsewhere as well, is that moving from one university to another, you can find the culture entirely differently. And I imagine it's the same in industry. You might work for a big pharma company, or, we often think about, I suppose when we talk about academia versus industry, we're often thinking about this in terms of fundamental scientists. But actually, that's not the case, is it? When we think about it could be that you applying your PhD working for some other healthcare related organization, but I think we'd still term that as industry in this context, and they're all different. Ashleigh, are you still there? Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much, Marianne. We'll come back to you for the chat in a little while. Ashleigh, are you ready?
Yes.
Perfect. Now then, let's get our other opinion from Ashleigh now, and because you didn't get a chance to chat before, hopefully you've got something different, another angle.
Can you see my slides?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
But while you're waiting, while Ashleigh's working the slides out, I've got stats. I prepared some statistics for you. So here we are. Here are some statistics. According to a survey by Nature in 2019, around 70% of PhD graduates are employed outside of academia. But as we know from our previous session on reproduce jobs for after PhD, I can't remember what the previous session was, is that only less than 4% of people with a PhD are unemployed. So certainly this talks to this thing that we've had lots of blogs and we've had podcasts on before, which is that PhD can be considered a training position that enables you to apply yourself in industry, in academia, working for a charity, or even a project manager or a science communicator. There are lots of different ways that you can apply that training. Although equally, I think there's a push at the moment, particularly amongst UK research funders, to try and do more to better retain people in research and not to lose them to other research fields, because of course then that means their funding went elsewhere. Have you worked it out?
It won't let me share, unfortunately.
Okay.
I might share my screen.
Well, I tell you what we can do is I'll spout some more statistics. Would you like to email me your slides, and I will share them?
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We did test this before, and it did work. I promise.
It was working before, yeah.
It was. Well, if you'd like to email them, I will keep pressing send and receive on my email, And we'll give you another statistic, which is a study by the American Institute of Physics found that those in industry tend to earn higher salaries than their counterparts in academia, with a median starting salary of $105,000 compared to $55,000. That's a considerable salary shift. Is that, sorry, I know you're muted, Marianne, but does that ring true for you? Not to put you on the spot, but did you get a massive pay rise when you went to work in industry? You did. Okay.
Yes,
so...
and one thing, if I may add on that, topic, I think prestigious institutions tend to pay less in academia. I mean, prestigious institutions tend to pay a little less than others, because there's the how do you say that, the stamp for, you kind of pay for the stamp of the university. So that's something to think about, I think, when exploring roles either in or outside of academia. Sometimes the prestigious places may not pay as much.
This is a question I was going to ask at the end, but I'll ask now while I'm just going to get these slides.
It has been sent. Sorry.
Great. No, don't be sorry. What are the prospects for promotion? So in academia, we kind of know that there's a little bit of a, I know that the traditional career path that we think of in academia is not the same anymore. It's not kind of, MSc, PhD, postdoc, fellow, senior fellow, in that same way. But how does it work in, are there opportunities for promotion where you are?
That's a good question. So for me, as I can't talk for other roles, but for MSLs, the path is usually MSL, then senior MSL, then depending on the institution, they will have other names like principal MSL, and then medical director position. So usually people will start by being regional medical director. So they're not having, they have, a medical director position, but it's more targeted to a specific location, and then they transition to medical director positions, and then any kind of higher level leadership roles. So there is a hierarchy, kind of in the same way that there's one in academia.
Yeah. I'm hitting send and receive, I promise. So here's another statistic for you. Research published in Higher Education Journal indicated that academic researchers often face significant stress due to job insecurity, with many positions being temporary contract based. I mean, I did before we came on the conversation today, I had a quick look through LinkedIn and a few other places to see if the jobs advertised in industry were permanent positions. And the truth of that is a lot of them weren't. They were still fixed term contracts based around a particular project or a particular initiative or something like that. So this it could be a little bit of a myth that there's this permanent, all the industry jobs are permanent, which means it offers that stability. I don't know if either of you have found that either.
I agree 100%. There's way more turnover in industry than in academia. That's something important to keep in mind. The job security is probably lower in industry, or at least depending. Again, there's so much variability. There's some companies that once they hire, you're good for the next 30 years. So it really depends, I think. But generally speaking, yeah.
Does that also mean that the job you go there to do has a good chance that it might change over time as well, in so much as you'll go there to work on a particular project, that project then comes to an end, and suddenly, whilst you might have been particularly interested in Alzheimer's, suddenly you're finding that if you want to stay with the employer you've gone to, you're going to have to sidestep into a different disease or a different field.
That's a good question. I think it depends on the size of the company. So there are some pharmaceutical companies that they have like a migraine department, an oncology department, a neurology department. Then they might shut one down and then redirect their employees to another department. In my experience, the company I work with is very focused. So I think it depends, but that could be an issue, definitely. But again, that's a variability.
I've got my last statistic. I'm running out of stats.
Are you receiving it? It
Not
says
yet.
it's sent.
Okay. I'll keep hitting send and receive. Additionally, a survey in the National Science Foundation found that 60% of doctoral recipients in science and engineering are employed in the private sector, reflecting broader opportunities outside of academia. So, again, this is a question for the audience. Are there any audience members that, if you have a PhD, have you moved into industry? Drop a message in the chat. I've got slides. I'm going to project these slides for you. You're going to have to just tell me when you want to, when you'd like to move them on. I'm going to move them to show in a window. There we go.
Okay.
Can you see your own
perfect.
slides?
Thank you.
They might be a bit grey, but if you tell me when you like to progress them, I will move them on for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Ash.
I'm so sorry. And thank you for having me. Okay, so I kind of wanted to talk about industry versus academia. I did try to provide a balanced kind of perspective. I actually think I focused a little bit more on industry because I felt like that might be the more unknown career path, particularly for PhD students. So next slide. Thank you. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about my journey, questions that help me decide how to seek out both academic and industry opportunities, and how the PhD prepares you for industry. Next slide. So I started my PhD thinking I would be an academic. My heart was really set on it. Next. And so I started tutoring and doing course development there because I wanted to experience not only the research pathway, but you can also have a lecturing pathway through academia as well. So I wanted to experience both. But then partway through, I started to question whether academia was for me. I was really uncertain. And so I thought maybe industry might be my way. It was during COVID and a lot of unknowns were happening, and we have seen a decline in actually tenure. So I thought, oh, maybe I should go to an industry pathway. And so I reached out to my connections through LinkedIn, and I actually got in touch with a previous PhD student that was in our office, and they had moved into industry, and I just sent them a message being like, I'm looking for a industry internship or placement, just to try and get a feel for the research. I will feel for research based in industry, and they actually offered me an internship. Thank you. So I started an internship as a behavioral insight consultant at QBE Insurance, and this was the most valuable experience I have ever had in terms of making that decision. So what I thought was really important to me, I realized actually wasn't. So I thought having a high salary would be, I thought, working a 9 to 5 would make me happy. Turns out it doesn't. It was really good, but I really craved the intellectual freedom. I actually missed working on things after hours. Like, I'd get an idea and then I wouldn't, because I would have to leave my work laptop at work. That was really strange, and I didn't like it, which was an interesting thing to learn about yourself. So after that, I chose to do a postdoc, and I actually looked for my postdoc through LinkedIn, and I started the search roughly around like 6 months out. And then I got my first postdoc. Next slide. Thank you. At the Center of Healthy Brain and Aging. Next. Thank you. So these are the questions that kind of helped me decide between industry and academia. It's just like, what will make me happy? So I looked at like good work culture, flexible working hours. Was it like teamwork or individual work, high salary, intellectual freedom? And these are all questions that you can really ask yourself. But my answers to these questions changed after doing that industry placement. So what I thought would be high on the list wasn't. And so I wrote down what I really liked about my PhD as a pathway for academia and that tutoring experience, and then what I disliked about it. And I actually thought about whether these likes and dislikes would actually be added or removed if I chose an industry job. So like work culture, well, that's not really unique to academia or industry. It's really it's really the institutional dependent. So I didn't really rate that high. Rather, with like intellectual freedom, it felt like that was more academia. So I also wanted to ask myself, is my experiences representative of that career path? So I did do a lot of teaching and as well as research throughout the PhD, and I felt like I got a good feel for the academic pathway. The industry placement was amazing in that they put me in different roles. They got me doing different jobs. And what I discovered from that was I didn't like really doing the facilitating, but I really enjoyed the statistics. And so that really actually altered the job searches that I did, not only for an industry job, but also for a postdoc as well. Like I wanted something that was really stats heavy, which again was interesting to learn about myself. So I felt like I had experienced both career paths, and so I had the full picture to make a decision. And I just want to put a note in there is like, you need to ask yourself, are you romanticizing the unknown because you're currently stressed about your PhD or you're currently stressed about your industry job? Next slide. So how to seek out these opportunities. LinkedIn, it was the best resource ever. Not only did it allow me to connect to the network that I already had, but the really great thing about this is the United States, you can add in like the job location. So if you have different demands on you, you can and you can't move around the world, particularly for a postdoc, you can alter your search and more refine your search here. So this is how I found my job at the Center of Healthy Brain and Aging. I put a few resources in here. One was international based and one's for Australia, sorry. But it was actually a guide that I used in helping make that decision. And so I find it a really valuable resource. So I just wanted to provide some resources for people. But I think you really need to ask yourself, like, if you want to experience industry, who do you know who's done a PhD that has now moved into industry? Can you reach out to them? Maybe they can introduce you to a few people or even get their perspective. I think people are so willing to help. You just need to reach out. Use LinkedIn. I know the big four do a lot of internships. So EY, KPMG, and Deloitte, they all do a lot of industry placements, and they do take on PhD students. But you do have to apply. You'll have to sit an interview, and I don't know if they are paid, which can be difficult when you're doing a PhD and also working an internship. Cold email people. just introduce yourself, but make sure you read up about the company and explain why you would want to be with that company or with that researcher. And then go to conferences, go to industry talks. I am sure if you asked around the department who has funding from an industry placement or who has collaborations in their research, they may be more open to taking on a PhD student or someone who wants to do this internship. Thank you. Next. Thank you. So I just want to note that if you are thinking about transitioning, what are some of the transferable skills and how do you really market yourself? So the PhD really sets you up well to work in industry, but I think sometimes we get a bit lost with the industry lingo. And so if you're writing your resume, the best thing you can do is look at other job titles from other companies and see the lingo, get a feel for the lingo, because like the managing multiple experiments, that classifies as project management. Which is probably not something that we use quite frequently. Multitasking and time management. People say, oh, I completed a PhD, but what does that mean in industry terms? Well, you can manage your time. You can accomplish this thing. You can teach yourself. So these are all of the buzzwords that I think you probably need to include in your cover letter. Conference presentations, well, that's communication and public speaking, and then tutoring and supervising students, like honors student or a research assistant, well, that's management and leadership skills. So these were something that I didn't know that my internship and my mentor there really highlighted to me. He's like, you're using the wrong lingo with my resume. And so he really helped me walk through that. And I just want to point out that there are some industry jobs in an academic context. So like a research officer, center manager, these don't have the pressures of publishing, but they do research. So there are options to exist in both worlds. Next slide. Thank you. You can always change your mind. So I think that's something that is unsaid. If you did want to experience industry and then you decided you wanted to come back, it may be difficult, but it's totally possible. I know plenty of people that have done it. And so you will have to put in some hard yards there though. And from speaking with them, their biggest difficulty actually was letting go of the high salary. So you may have to take a pay cut to then come in at a lower level to then rise up again. But if this is something that you really want, the door is never closed. And if you keep your toe in both worlds, then that's perfectly fine as well. Like you can come back and guest lecture, you can help get in contact with your supervisor and help with other projects along the side so that you're getting up your publications while still being in industry. Next slide. So the whole premise of my talk is industry versus academia, how to decide. Get experience in both. It was the best thing I ever just did, and then you can make your decision. You may be surprised. I learned so much about myself. So thank you. This is it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And I think what I love about both of your talks is you make the point that it's a personal decision, right? And it's not necessarily gonna be what you expect it's gonna be. I mean, Ashleigh, you found that when you came back, and I think the idea you both pointed out of writing down what it is you want from your job, which is a major part of our life, right? And writing down that list to say, what is it I want? And I love the idea that you know, what you thought you liked, and then you went and then you suddenly realize you missed that kind of because there is that freedom in academia, isn't there, to follow your nose, to pursue things, to, there's always something going on. I don't know about you. I find it's a very dynamic workplace. There's always something. There's another grant round. There's something else going on. Somebody in the, you work with has got a new idea. It's a very busy, dynamic place. That isn't to say industry isn't as well, but ultimately it's what matters to you. And industry isn't necessarily always this amazing place that we think it is, because there is still, it's not perfect. And I think often if you're in academia, you think of industry as being like, I don't know, that it's like there's some kind of wall you've got to break down to get into it. But once you're there, it's great and it's better. It's not better, it's just different. And there's different places to work. When do you think people make this decision? Often, do you think those who face this dilemma the most, for me and the people I've interacted with recently, because most of our work's with early career researchers, are straight after the PhD. Kind of, I don't know, particularly I think if you went straight from undergrad to postgrad to PhD, one after the other, feels like you've spent the best part of all your life in education. And then you just want to go get a job that's different, because even carrying on as a postdoc feels like continuing education. I mean, you're still in the same environment. It's still do you think, and is that the point where often do you find people have this dilemma? I don't know, Ashleigh, you go first.
Well, I feel like a lot of people were actually having the dilemma during their PhD. So I definitely had the dilemma during the PhD of like, what jobs do I need to start applying for? And a lot of my friends had the same problem. I was lucky that I got to experience it. I think if you don't, it leads to the unknown, or
grass is greener.
like what if, right? Rather with like that's been settled for me, so I never really have to wonder what if. But that's not to say that it's completely closed. Like, you don't really know what the future holds. It was a decision that I made based on, the needs that I had for work at that particular point in time. Who's to know that salary might become more important for me if I have a family, independence, or things like that. So things change.
And working in your field, there are, I guess, lots of opportunities in industry in that kind of area that you work in. So there's plenty of choice. Marianne, it came at a different time in your career for you. So your swap to industry wasn't, because I'd imagine as a PhD student, it's quite easy to think, I'm so just fed up now. I want to do something different. And whether that's going off to be a science communicator, or whether it's going off to work for in a related field but doing something different, I can totally understand that. What was it that inspired the change for you, Marianne?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, my PhD experience was a very positive one. I had an awesome mentor and supervisor, and I just felt like that completely influenced my PhD experience. I had, so much stress during my PhD, as we all do, but I had, I was lucky enough to have such a great mentor, and that really changed made my experience globally very positive if I compared to my peers who were in the same environment I was. So when I, started working as a postdoc in a completely different environment, and I didn't have that kind of support, then I started feeling the stress and the tension and, the pressure to perform. And it just felt like, it kept getting higher and higher. And I was still, I was not opposed to working in academia. I thought I would end up working in academia. And the way that I approached things was, I want to find a role that really excites me, that motivates me, that I'm passionate about. And that's kind of how I targeted. I talked to so many people. I think I talked to 50 to 75 people. So just to figure out what it is that I like, what it is that I don't like. And then that's how I ended up finding the role that I did, because for me, I had very specific criteria. Like, I don't want to move out of the Bay Area. So, if it's a position in academia, it needs to be within like a 50-mile, perimeter. And for me, the options were Stanford, UCSF, or that's it, So I kind of, my options were very limited. And so that's how I ended up exploring jobs outside of academia. But I think once you have very specific criteria in your mind, then that kind of guides the choice. But for me, I was never academia or industry. I was really open to both. And I just wanted to find something that made sense with my experience, values, expertise, etc.
That makes sense. So, I mean, both of you make the point there. It's coming back to writing that kind of list of what's important to me. What do I want out of life? What do I need from the job I do? And that can be even, down to details of, does the job I want even exist in the place where I where I need to live? So, I mean, that makes complete sense that you take that approach, and that clearly for some that comes after the PhD, but it could also come after a postdoc job that you've not necessarily enjoyed or that hasn't delivered on the environment, that I can suddenly realize makes you start to question, am I where I want to be? I mean, you both make the point as well about how let's just talk practically for a moment about how you make that transition. So Ashleigh, you gave some great go-to guides. I've seen some of those as well on how you translate the language of the skills you acquired during your PhD or postdoc into a CV that might be more recognizable in industry or in business or in just outside of academia. Let's just say, we shouldn't call this academia versus industry, should we? It's just academia or elsewhere, really. Because I think industry, everybody assumes that means pharma, and it clearly doesn't just mean pharma. It could it could be an insurance company. It could be one of the big consultancy firms, as you highlighted. So, how do you think you go about that? Is it just is LinkedIn the key? Go on, Marianne. You've got. How did you find yours? No. Tell us.
I had a visceral reaction to LinkedIn because for me personally, that did not work at all.
Well, I have to say, go to the Dementia Researcher website, because we do have job listings, but they are mostly academic, I have to confess, or charity organizations.
Yeah. In academia, that might work, but in industry, at least in the Bay Area, people will receive 200 applications. They all have PhDs for one clinical scientist position. So how do you really have a CV that is different from these other 200 super qualified people from all over the world, So I think for me, talking to people, cold emailing people that have the kind of role that I want in the company that I would like to work for was what worked. At AAIC or other conferences, going to the booths, meeting people in person. Or I think the easiest path is to have an introduction through your mentor or supervisor, especially if they have a lot of contacts and a wide network. That can be really, really helpful.
And I suppose it's harder still if you're wanting to jump into an industry that you're not necessarily involved in now. I mean, if you're going to AIC and you want to stay in Alzheimer's, that's great because you're going to meet lots of people in Alzheimer's research. But if you want to go into a different disease area or a different field altogether, that's where I wrote a blog ages ago on how to write a cold email. And my mentor recently, we had a long chat about how to become noticed by the person you wanted to work from. And I probably poorly advised them to become their nicest stalker. So start to follow them on their socials, like everything they do. Because if people like your posts, you kind of eventually go back and like, who is this who's liking all my posts? But then you've got to make sure your bio is really good and that they become a little bit interested in you. Then when you do eventually email them and say, hey, look, I like you for this reason, or could we have a chat? They're more, and be direct and explicit in what you want with an easy request, which is, could I meet you? Make it easy for them to say yes rather than making some long, complicated, which I've just done this talking to. What do you, I mean, you both mentioned or Marianne, certainly you mentioned mentorship. How useful is it potentially to have a mentor that's outside of academia, potentially to help you have a wider perspective? Have you had that, Ashleigh? Do you have a circle of mentors, or just the one, or any?
Well, outside of academia is tricky. Because most of my work has been inside academia. I suppose, do mentors, if they change to industry, then become an industry mentor?
Good question.
So, because that's how I found, well, the internship is they were originally a PhD connection that then turned to an industry connection. So, I mean, that's where I built my network, but I went right from high school to undergrad to PhD, so I didn't have that network. I think that as you go through the PhD and more time in academia, you'll see the different shifts and you'll get to know people, and you will see the transitions. In terms of industry, I've always just been a cold emailer and introduced myself. I believe in LinkedIn, sorry. Because, well, that's how I created that network, and found my current job.
Widening, like a wide circle of friends. I mean, I think it's cast a net wide. We had so last night we had a different kind of chat with Sam Moxon, who's just taken a research idea and spun out a company from the university and through an Innovate UK grant. And one of the things that they gave them money to do, and the task for these people as innovators, was to go and talk. They had to, and they literally have to write this down and go and talk to 100 people. That was part of this innovation grant. They had to go talk to 100 people in different industries to work out where this product that they developed, to find alternative markets for it, and not just to assume that this is the single market. And I guess it's a bit like that with you as the product. You know, you are the product. Go talk to 100 people and find out where your skill set might fit and what opportunities that might come from that. I live, I don't know if you've ever come across it, I live really close to Harwell, which is this kind of amazing scientific campus that's got lots of space exploration, and they build satellites, and they've got a beam line that a diamond light source, this kind of amazing thing. And I've often looked through the jobs there to think, oh yeah, completely different industry. I mean, this is building satellites or space stations and things, and thought, but I could apply for that. I never have, because I love the job I've got. But but cast a wide net, you might find a different industry. Do you know what? We've spent so long chatting now that we're at 53 minutes. We're supposed to actually give everybody who's watching a chance to have some conversation. So I do have more questions, but I'm going to set these aside in favor of your questions now. But thank you very much to Marianne and Ashleigh for joining us and sharing your thoughts. They're going to join us in the chat in a couple of minutes. Before we just end the live element of this today, I just want to remind you that we'll be back next Wednesday. I think that's in the evening, where we're going to talk about the latest drugs in dementia, and I won't be hosting that because I'll be on my way to AAIC. We're going to have Sam Moxon, who was doing the industry chat last night, is going to host that. And then we're back a week later, where I'm still away, but Cleona Farrell, who's a postdoc from UCL, is going to host a session on how to present your research and presenting your research 101. And that's I think that's in the evening, and next week's is at lunchtime. So do join and RSVP to the invites in that, and we'll join you in the chat now. Thank you very much, both of you, for taking time out.
Thank you.